Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for the CVRP for Public Fleets webinar today. My name is Sergio Morales, and I am the project coordinator for dealerships and fleet programs at the Center for Sustainable Energy. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I want to welcome you all to the third webinar in our six-part webinar series. Throughout the series, we will discuss some of the incentives available to fleets, highlight some barriers to fleet electrification, introduce organizations whose products will help you manage your EV fleet, and we will feature fleet managers who have successfully electrified all or a portion of their fleet. During the series, our panelists will discuss the most pressing matters involved in fleet electrification. However, if you find that you have experienced a situation that we do not cover in our series, please feel free to email us with your concerns or questions, and we will be sure to answer them to the best of our abilities or connect you with someone who has experience in similar situations. We'll be sure to leave time at the end of the presentations for questions. We're asking that attendees please enter their questions into the question prompt in the webinar toolbar. Please enter questions into this prompt as they arise, and we will address all of them at the end of the presentation. We've muted all phone lines and will only be accepting questions submitted electronically. Today's focus is on charging infrastructure, which includes data and power management, charging options, and options to reduce your energy cost. I will begin today's webinar with a brief overview of the rebate CSE offers fleet managers for those of you joining us for the first time. Today's speakers include Desmond Wheatley, CEO of Envision Solar, which offers off-grid solar charging options, Trevor Hyatt, Director of Business Development at Cyber Switching, a power management solution company, and finally we will hear from Aydin Goreshian, Senior OEM Integration Manager with Greenlots, whose fully integrative software can help customers manage their charging infrastructure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, I wanted to give you a quick overview of the program and the incentive our organization offers. The Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, administers the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, also known as CVRP, throughout the state for the California Air Resource Board, or CARB. CARB is part of the California Environmental Protection Agency, Cal EPA, and exists to promote and protect public health, welfare, and ecological resources through the effective and efficient reduction of air pollutants while recognizing and considering the effects on the economy of the state. CVRP funding is determined by an annual funding plan that is developed with public input and approved by CARB. The Clean Vehicle Rebate Project promotes clean vehicle adoption in California by offering rebates of up to $7,000 for the purchase or lease of new, eligible zero-emission vehicles, including electric, plug-in hybrid electric, and fuel cell vehicles. Our organization offers these rebates for light-duty vehicles, but for medium to heavy-duty vehicles, our counterpart, the Hybrid and Zero-Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project, or HVIP, offers vouchers for medium to heavy-duty vehicles. For more information regarding HVIP, please visit www.californiahvip.org. The rebate amount CVRP can offer you would depend on the type of vehicle you wish to acquire, with fuel cell electric vehicles receiving $5,000 and zero-emission motorcycles getting $900. For fleets whose vehicles are domiciled in disadvantaged community areas, there is an increase of $2,000 available for you to claim. In order to find out if your fleet is domiciled in a DAC, please visit cleanvehiclerebate.org/fleet. You will then click on the checked map link and you will be redirected to the Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 tool. Here you will enter your address to see if you are located within a DAC and therefore eligible or not to receive the increased rebate. Fleet electrification is still a relatively new idea, but it promises to be a model that can be replicated by agencies and private consumers alike. However, because fleet electrification is still in its infancy, many fleet managers have faced issues they did not anticipate when they were planning to electrify their fleets. Some of these problems include having brick vehicles or vehicles that sit on the lot unused, which can arise from lack of charging infrastructure during the planning phase. The other issues include low utilization, bad driver behavior, improperly trained staff, or problems scaling up. Some of these issues have been discussed in previous webinars or will be addressed in detail during the following webinars, where we will focus on each situation and what you can do as a fleet manager to ensure your fleet electrification checklist is complete. Today, we will focus on organizations who have innovative charging infrastructure, data, and asset management solutions. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, President and CEO of Envision Solar, Desmond Wheatley.
Sergio, thank you very much for those opening slides and for the introduction, and thank all of you for listening here today, and also the Center for Sustainable Energy for putting on this important informational webinar. As Sergio mentioned, my name is Desmond Wheatley. I'm the President CEO of a San Diego-based sustainable technology innovation company called Envision Solar. And we invent, patent, design, and actually manufacture solar-powered products for three market verticals. The first and by far the most vibrant and fastest growing is the EV charging vertical. But we also use our products for outdoor media and crucially for energy security, by which we simply mean that our products are available even during blackouts and brownouts, which are increasingly something that we should all be concerned about. So I think most of you know a great deal about electric vehicles. I won't dwell on this slide here, but obviously electric vehicles have come a long way. There were only one electric vehicle available when we started in business manufacturing our products. We might have been a little ahead of the curve, but and this number is constantly changing, but there are about 273 EV models available globally today. The world's going to need literally millions of EV chargers. Whether those EVs are owned by private citizens or fleet operators like yourselves, millions of EV chargers in the coming years. So it's clear that there's a need for something that's rapidly deployable and very easy to put to work. Here's a little graph. You may have seen something similar to this. This is what the experts think. I'm always a little bit wary of what experts think about anything. I include myself in that bracket, by the way, sometimes referred to as an expert. But there's obviously going to be a lot of growth in EVs. They're definitely coming. I think the experts will be wrong about this. Actually, I think it's going to happen faster than this, as is often the case with this type of new technology. It takes people a little bit of time to get up speed on it. But then when it happens, particularly when the consumer gets engaged, like smartphones and tablets and laptops and everything else that we've seen before, I think we're going to see very rapid adoption. So that's a snapshot of what the experts think about the adoption of electric vehicles. And of course, we're seeing cities and even nations banning outright internal combustion engine vehicles within the next couple of decades. And fleet operators, very often the first people to make those transitions. Cities like New York and many others making entire transitions of electric vehicles at the moment, and those are customers of ours. So the quick question is obviously, how do you charge an EV, whether it's a fleet vehicle or not? And the answer is great news, frankly. You can really charge them anywhere. And that's very important to remember in terms of owning and operating EVs. You no longer have to go to a destination to charge your vehicle anymore. You can now charge it where you were already going. And I think that's going to be a major paradigm shift in the way consumers and certainly also fleet operators operate. So I talked a little bit about what experts are thinking. Let me take you through a few slides right now where I hope to debunk some of the stuff that's going around within the industry right now. And I hope this will be helpful for you as you plan infrastructure moving into the future. Quick apology to Mythbusters here. As we said, I didn't ask for the permission to use this, but I won't also charge them for promoting their brand. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is DC fast charging. So there's an awful lot of talk about DC fast charging. Very expensive to install, very impactful to infrastructure. And I got to tell you that in 10 years of driving an EV and owning nothing but EVs, I've only used DC fast chargers for maybe the amount of times I could count on the fingers of both hands. There's a great sort of rush to try and replicate the gas station model, where we're trying to go somewhere special and charge electric vehicles as quickly as possible. But it's really not necessary in most cases. You can see here on this slide, the average American sedan drives 31.4 miles per day, according to the Department of Transportation. You can get that done in about 2 hours on a level 2 charger. Most vehicles are idle for 95% of the time, over 20 hours a day. So there's really no need for them to go to DC fast chargers, except in some particular use cases like corridor charging. If we're going to drive from here to San Francisco, for example, only the most nefarious characters want to spend several hours hanging out in a rest area. So fast charging in that type of environment is probably a good idea. But elsewhere, I think most of the time, it's really worth looking at whether you need it before you invest the large sums of money that are required to get that done. Home charging is, of course, the other thing that the industry is happily telling everybody that we'll be able to undertake. And of course, that's fine if you happen to live in a nice, neat place like this and have your Tesla parked in the garage. But in fact, turns out that most people don't, of course, live in single-family residences. Most of them live in what are called multi-dwelling units or other environments. And even those who do live in single-family residences have a great deal of difficulty getting their vehicles near anywhere that they'll be able to charge them. In fact, there is a CEC report that's done where they pointed out that something like 1 in 7 apartment-dwelling Californians will be able to charge their vehicles even if the infrastructure was in place. So there's clearly a need for something else. And we view that as workplace charging, and even for fleet operators, the parallel here for you is it may not always be possible to put infrastructure in the places where you're parking the vehicles today for a variety of reasons, most of them driven by availability of grid circuits. Another interesting myth out there is that somehow DC fast charging is going to solve the problem of apartment dwellers. And this is the idea that you're going to put in a single a DC fast charger and then everybody in the apartment building is going to share them. But of course, that sort of misses the practical impact of how do you cycle vehicles over a single fast charger. And again, this is also relevant for fleet operators. If you're being told that it'd be a good idea to put in a fast charger so that you can charge your vehicles quickly and therefore you only need one for many vehicles, you have to consider how are you going to cycle the vehicles across that charger. In this image here, of course, what we're talking about is the idea of apartment dwellers getting up in the middle of the night so they can go and unplug their neighbor's car and plug in their own vehicle. More than likely going to be met with a hail of gunfire if they do that, but certainly not a very practical solution. And similarly with fleet, I think more plugs and slower charging is probably, in many cases, a better solution. We've certainly found that ourselves, and we have more fleet customers than any other type of customer. Rate-based charging, that sounds good too. The utility you think that you're going to charge your vehicles whenever they tell you electricity is going to be the cheapest. That has not worked in the past. As you can see here, we had $5 gallon gas in California a few years ago, and everyone said that would be the end of driving. No one would go to the mall again. But in fact, that ended up being about a 3% reduction in miles driven. People don't really care how much gasoline costs or how much electricity costs. They like to moan about it, but at the end of the day, they're going to fuel when they need to fuel. And so I think that rate-based charging is probably overplayed. However, fleet operators will do a better job than anybody of it because you're better at managing your fuel costs. But I still think there's going to be a major impact from this, something not to pay too much attention to. And then the grid. We're heavily reliant on a grid today. The grid is the most magnificent machine ever built by man. It's the biggest machine ever built by mankind, but it is a 100-year-old model. We currently have about 10 terawatt hours of current daily load on it, and we're going to need another 1.5 terawatt hours of load to support EVs. When the whole fleet electrifies, which it certainly will. It's very difficult to get that done, and of course, grid can be prone to failure sometimes as well, as magnificent as it is now. There's this idea that we're prepared for blackouts is a bit worrying, particularly when we move to an all-electric fleet. Grid blackouts are already costing US businesses a couple $100 billion today, but when you have an all-electric fleet, of course, a blackout means your vehicles are grounded until the power comes back up. And if you're in New York City, that's 4 days, Hurricane Sandy. We know that we've had nefarious nation states, the Russians and the Chinese hacking the grid, terrorists, weather events, whatever else. You definitely don't want to have all your eggs in that basket. If your fleet is relying on the grid, you should have some other source of power to power the thing up. So think about that too. And then vehicle to grid, I won't spend a lot of time on this. It sounds great again, but and the technology works very well actually. And again, for fleet operators, you will probably take the best advantage of this. But for typical consumers whose greatest fear is what they perceive to be the vulnerability of their battery in their vehicle, the idea of letting the utility discharge it when it suits them, I don't think there's enough money in that for anybody to do that. So again, from a fleet operations point of view, you will have the data and the intelligence to take advantage of this perhaps, but I'm not sure that it's going to be a consumer wide deal in the future. It's not getting easier to install grid-tied infrastructure. By the time you go through all the permitting, environmental impacts, trenching, and electrical contracting, and general contracting, pulling cables and switchgear upgrades and transformers and everything else, It's actually taking longer and longer. You can see here it's about an average of 18 months for the government in California to do it, and that's as long as 24 months in New York City. So unless you've got very low-hanging fruit locations where you're going to park a vehicle right next to an existing circuit where you can mount an EV charger, you really want to think about the total impact of doing the installation, because very often people get the charger in a cardboard box in their office, but then discover that they've got to dig a trench across their parking lot and do some grid upgrades and stuff. It can be expensive. So definitely want to spend a lot of time thinking about where you're going to charge, and don't let the infrastructure make that decision for you. Make the vehicle and the driver make that decision for you, and then find a solution that works for them. You don't need to be in Phoenix for solar to work. In fact, New York City is our biggest customer. If you go to the next slide, please. Also, Pittsburgh is another customer. We've got lots. We're deployed in 85 municipalities, 17 states, 3 nations across the Caribbean. And the weather's pretty crap in many of the locations that we're in. But if you have a well-engineered product, as we do with onboard energy storage, you can drive on sunshine in any of those locations. Very proud of having cities like Pittsburgh and New York City driving on sunshine now using our products. So let's just talk about driving on sunshine for a minute. This is what we do for a living. We make solar-powered electric vehicle charging stations. Next slide, please. They are not connected to the grid in any way at all. This is a magnificent photograph of one of our units deployed outside the state capitol building in Sacramento, and we provide EV charging with them. Also an outdoor media platform. Sometimes that's a good way of paying for the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Although only in rare circumstances that work. And then also energy security, because we're not connected to the grid, we're not vulnerable to the type of failures that the grid can have, and as a result, we're becoming relied upon by first responders and other types like that. Not just to keep their electric vehicles running, but also to provide them as a source of emergency power during that type of failure. Next slide, please. Could be used in a lot of different ways. I won't go into too much detail on this slide, but you can see it's not just cars, also two-wheelers. They're actually growing faster than four-wheelers are. And the big thing is they're mobile, so they're delivered to your site, whether you're close to our factory or across the country or outside the country, doesn't matter. We deliver these units intact. Next slide, please. And they arrive on your site ready to operate. You don't need to have any kind of a grid connection. And this is really the money slide here. No engineering, no permitting, no construction, no trenching, no foundations, no switchgear upgrades, no carbon footprint, and above all else, no utility bill. So from a total cost of ownership point of view, this is just the cheapest and most reliable and most rapidly deployed and scalable solution out there. Next slide, please. So this is a quick 2-minute video. It's really boring, and it's sort of meant to be. If we could watch the video, that'd be great, because this will show you how we actually deliver this to site. This is level 2 charging, level 1 charging, or even DC fast charging. And just quickly show you here how we do this. From the user's point of view, the electric vehicle and the driver has no idea that they're charging off solar, but this is how we arrive. We arrive at your location like this, towing the product ready to operate on a specialized piece of equipment that we also design and manufacture. And our bigger customers actually don't just buy the product from us, they buy this and we train them in the use of this, and then they can move the units around anytime they want to as well. So if you deploy somewhere, it turns out that wasn't that best place to put the thing, you're liberty to move it somewhere else later on. That's great for fleet operators. You can kind of heat map where the use is. If some of the units are not being used very much, you can move them to locations where you're getting a lot of use. And this gives you really dynamic charging infrastructure. It's just obviously impossible to do this with grid-tied infrastructure. Pick the things up, move them around anytime you like. It's as easy as you're seeing. This takes about just a number of minutes. In fact, that driver who just deployed that there, his record is 4 minutes. So 4 minutes to get a permanent level 2 EV charging solution in place. As you see, it's arrived on site, it's ready to operate. And then again, from the user point of view, it makes no difference. You'll notice there's a charge point charger on this unit. So that's another thing that's important to point out. We're agnostic as to the vendor of the EVSE or the charger itself. You make that decision. You tell us what charger network you're on. This is an app we're showing you here too. So we have an app. You'll get all the data about the units, but totally agnostic as to the charger vendor. The unit fits inside a standard legal size parking space, does not reduce parking in any way at all. And the tracking that we have a patent on our tracking solution. That's going to allow you to get about 25% more electricity than a fixed array, but it does it in a way that doesn't in any way impact you. Let's go to the next slide. Doesn't in any way impact your parking because our patented tracking solution that doesn't swing into adjacent parking spaces. Next slide. These are just some images of how it's deployed. Any location, anywhere it can see the slide. Also charges during a blackout, as I mentioned, that's very important. And all of our units are delivered to government customers with an integrated e-power panel. So you'll also get an emergency source of power. You don't need to fuel it, you don't need to maintain it. It's always there for you in the event that there's a blackout or some other disaster. Great for fleets. As you can see, Caltrans using them. They're one of actually Caltrans, I think, is our single biggest customer in the state of California. And then New York Police Department. Just show you, New York's been using our product since 2015 through New York winters, through God knows what kind of weather and everything else like that. So it's an excellent solution. Doesn't have to be in the Southwest. Level 2 DC fast charging, we do in the event, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I don't think DC fast charging is the right solution for most instances, but when you do need it, we do it with a bank of 4 of these products. Again, no grid infrastructure, no construction, nothing else, all deployed in minutes, and you get a 50 kilowatt DC fast charging, never get a utility bill, never get any demand charges. Next slide, please. And then we have a larger product, Solar Tree. This is really for medium and heavy duty vehicles. We're under contract to deploy these for a transit authority running full-size 40-foot buses and doing DC fast charging as well for vehicles. But same technology as the EV ARC, it's bigger. And it does require a foundation. So this is not dropped off in 4 minutes. This comes as a kit, and it's usually installed in a matter of a small number of days. Next slide, please. Remember, all the power is free. You never get a utility bill. We'll just go through this and the next slide, please. So I won't spend time on these because I'm worried I'm encroaching on other people's time. But anyway, you'll never get a utility bill. No construction. Next slide, please. No permitting, really no planning required. If you make a mistake, we can move the things, and you'll have reliable power during a blackout or a brownout. Customers here, just to show you that none of these are easy wins. They're all very discerning, and we're delighted to have all of them as happy customers, most of them repeat customers. And that's just a quick image of where we manufacture the product. We have a 50,000 square foot facility at Miramar, San Diego area in California. You're all welcome to come visit us anytime you'd like to. Just get in touch with us through the Center for Sustainable Energy or go to our website, envisionsolar.com. And yeah, I'd love to see you. Come and see how the products are made. I'm fiercely proud of our team. We employ combat veterans, disabled workers, minorities. We're a meritocracy, but we seek out merit in places that I think others ignore. And as a result, we've got a fantastic team of people making a very high quality American product. And we're the future of fuel. So drive on sunshine. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Desmond. That was very informative. I really enjoyed that presentation. Next on our agenda, we have Trevor Hyatt. Now, Trevor is the Director of Business Development at Cyber Switching and is an electrical engineering graduate from UC Santa Barbara. He's a Silicon Valley veteran who has delivered cutting-edge industrial connectivity solutions and is excited now to be empowering folks to connect to and control their electrical power.
Perfect. Appreciate it, Sergio. Why don't I actually introduce Cyber Switching just a little bit? So Cyber Switching actually has been around for quite a long while. We've been doing power management since 1994. And we started out working primarily in power distribution for data centers, and then also moving out toward buildings, so managing power and, again, the circuits within the buildings. More recently, we've been spreading out from within the building and coming out into the parking lot to where the EVs are. And again, that's where the hot stuff is, so the exciting thing. So we really are taking our power management expertise from the building all the way out to the EVs in the parking lot. So what I wanted to cover is what you don't need to forget on power management. The first thing, my first is to consider the bigger power picture. So a lot of folks, when they start thinking about fleets and EVs and the infrastructure that's going to be required, they think, well, I'm just going to go ahead and put a charger out in the parking lot. And a lot of times that's that initial look, at least, is ignoring the broader picture, which you eventually get into, and that is to look at the overall power consumption picture. This is, again, something that we take into consideration as we build out our own solutions, and that means a lot of other heavy loads. So the EVs in a parking lot, yes, they're very large loads, hundreds of thousands of watts potentially, depending on the size of the installation, the number of vehicles. But there's those cars are not just plugged into an outlet at the curb. They're actually coming back oftentimes within the facility or the building, whether it's an office space or a multi-unit dwelling or what have you. We see much the same kind of market. So those facilities are going to have also their own local loads, right? Very large HVACs, very large equipment, motors, pumps, et cetera, that are drawing, again, potentially hundreds of thousands of watts within that building. So one of the key don'ts is to don't think I just need a charger. Again, that's very typical, and that's the kind of the first round look at what's out there and what am I going to need to hook up my fleet vehicles or my employees' vehicles. But oftentimes that's just a small piece of the overall picture. Standard charging oftentimes requires a dedicated line for each of those charging stations. And I think Desmond highlighted that a little bit. So if you look to those yellow lines on this slide, you can see those routed out from the facility out to the parking lot. And oftentimes the cost for the infrastructure itself is dwarfing the cost of the chargers themselves. So, whether it's the trenching required to cover those long lines out to the parking lot, potential additional circuits and panel upgrades to support all those new lines out to the parking lot. Even again, I think Desmond highlighted new infrastructure such as new transformers and the likes may be a challenge. So you really should consider the whole infrastructure's CapEx as you look to upgrading your fleet or even starting with a new fleet of electrified vehicles. Another key point, another don't think the power is just there. It may be not. And oftentimes, a lot of my experiences working with folks is oftentimes an upgrade of an existing facility, an existing parking lot. And many times over, those parking lots were just not designed to have a lot of power. They have very limited power, oftentimes just for the lighting, et cetera, out in the parking lot or in the parking facility. And those typical level 2 chargers even require 40, 50, 60, 90 amps plus. You put 10 or more of those together, you're talking hundreds of amps and again, potentially hundreds of thousands of watts worth of service that may not be available through the existing circuitry there. So that could, again, require expensive facility upgrades, project delays, just to enable the sourcing of the available power that you may need. So that could be a lack of sufficient circuits or even a lack of sufficient supply. So here's another don't. It's what today's charging solutions don't do, or at least most of the ones I've seen don't do real well. One is there's really not a great entire premises solution. So oftentimes when folks are looking at EV charging, they're looking to only tackle that charging, the EVs, and the solutions that are out there oftentimes only look at the EV charging. They're oftentimes entirely disconnected really from the rest of the building energy usage picture. And so they're not taking into consideration those large loads, et cetera, that might be within that existing building or facility. There's no monitoring or control capabilities. So an ability to not only see that big picture, but then also manage it, right? And in light of the usage conditions and the optimizing the energy to minimize the overall cost, whether it's coming from a time of usage charges or even peak demand hours that we see in many states, including California. Some capability there would be key in order to manage the pictures. Oftentimes, you don't need all 10 of those cars to start charging simultaneously while your HVAC is firing in the background. There's some way to manage that. And again, take advantage of the fact that many of these situations just require a long dwell time or a time where cars are just sitting idle in the parking lot overnight for a fleet or even during the daytime while folks are working. There's no EV charging solution that alleviates the move your EV productivity issues. I think, again, Desmond's actually does a good job. I think the solar thing is a really cool play on that. I think a lot of folks with other types of solutions may not be able to resolve this as well. And I've seen some very big companies, even amazing companies, that do have that challenge where you wake up in the middle of the night and you got to go move your bus or your fleet vehicle, or you've got to have your employees go downstairs and unplug their car and plug in their next car. And so that's a huge waste of time, a huge frustrating thing, and especially if somebody hasn't done their job and they're taking their responsibility to do that. So moving around the EV is a policy that ends up coming into play when folks just don't have enough chargers available to support the number of fleet vehicles or employee vehicles that are available, and that's just a big headache, waste of time. And then also, again, just mentioning total cost of ownership. So whether it's the infrastructure upgrades to the panels, the trenching, et cetera, coming out, and also the OpEx cost, the overall utilization, productivity issues that might be impacted. Just adding chargers here tends to drive up the CapEx and drive up the OpEx, and so that's a real challenge. So there are a few good solutions, and I'm going to highlight one. This happens to come from cyber switching, so this is my plug. But I do think this is a very compelling solution to alleviate a lot of those challenges that folks are looking at as they build out their fleet capabilities, or electrify their fleets, or even start their new fleets, or even to support their employees. So the EVMC is depicted on the left as it is there. So on the far left there is a panel picture, and then the EVMC is kind of sandwiched in the middle, and the cars are there. So you can charge up to 4 or even more EVs through a single circuit as it's depicted. So you got that one yellow line there, and then that's essentially duplexed or multiplexed out to multiple vehicles. In doing that, you can actually reduce the panel upgrade and trenching costs by up to about 50%. As you would imagine, especially for those long dwell time scenarios where you're parked overnight for a fleet or you're parked during the daytime, you're able to alleviate that move your EV concern. So if you consider just 4 stations, for example, the math is shown there, but that works out to about 85 hours a month. Surprisingly, I did these numbers myself. 85 hours a month and lost productivity, and so that's here in California at least. That's about $3,000 a month. They're not cheap out here. So a serious ongoing OpEx expense as you consider having to deal with swapping chargers around. Also, with the solution, everyone does get a charge. So even though it's multiplex, there's flexible charging options to provide priority support for specific stations, for example, VIPs, or if your boss really insists that they've got to have a full charge at all times and have that immediately available. Also, the daily drive is covered. And again, much as Desmond highlighted, very often, a couple hours is oftentimes enough to charge a daily use for an electrified vehicle. And so you don't need to be charging the full time. And so those folks can get topped off for their regular usage. And then ultimately you save on energy costs and optimize the energy. So the EVMC, as I'm shown here, is actually part of an integral picture that really does integrate in with the larger building power management solutions from cyber switching. So it really does look at the entire premises. It takes into consider the other loads in your facility, and you can manage it, set rules, and also intelligently control how and when those various circuits are enabled and timed and scheduled, et cetera. And so in doing so, and with cost-aware, time-of-use, and demand-aware charging, you're able to reduce that peak demand by up to about 75%. Last piece is do zero infrastructure EV expansion. So a lot of folks that we're seeing also, and this is another challenge, they have one set of stations, and it was quite expensive to install those, to do all the infrastructure, et cetera. And now they come and realize, well, lo and behold, the EVs are doing a fantastic job. We're going to expand capacity. But now I'm looking again at the infrastructure costs. So here's a clever way to just basically use that EVMC from your available circuits and quadruple or even get up to 8 times as many vehicles charged off that available infrastructure. And then basically, in a nutshell, it'd be a bolt-on to that existing circuit from those existing chargers to quadruple up the number of vehicles that you can charge. So you can expand from 1 to 4 with no added infrastructure. And no added infrastructure means lower installation costs and a faster rollout. So in summary, do monitor and control your entire premises. Take a look at the entire picture and optimize around that. Optimize your EV charging and alleviate the move your EV productivity issues. It's a real headache, and it's just uncivilized, frankly. Reduce total cost of ownership and entire building power infrastructure. So really take into account the entire picture, and that should be what you look at first. And in doing so, you can go green, and you can reduce your TCO, so that's a win-win. So thank you very much for everybody that's in attendance. Thank you so much to the Center for Sustainable Energy, and please reach me at the address shown here, and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Trevor. Finally, from Greenlots, we have Aideen Goreshian. Aideen is a senior manager at Greenlots, working in the Auto OEM Integration Division. He spent the past year and a half at Greenlots utilizing his 12 years of experience in the automotive industry and moving forward with solutions for the electrification of mobility. So take it away, Aideen.
Thank you very much, Sergio, and thank you everyone for attendance. Pleasure to be here, and thank you to Desmond and Trevor for sort of going down the path which we all need to sort of consider, which is, what is it that makes up this entire sort of scenario that's going to be the most beneficial for all of the fleet customers. So if we could go into the next slide, and we'll just discuss quickly about why we think Greenlots can help out here. So quick breakdown of Greenlots, and for those of you that may not have heard of who we are and what we do, we are working toward powering the future of electric transportation with our software and the services that we have to offer. Been around since 2008, just celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year. Headquartered here in LA, however, we do have nationwide presence and are able to help support various areas. Our global footprint goes beyond the U.S. and Canada. We do have our presence in Southeast Asia and also in India, working to expand that ongoing. Currently at 150 employees and contractors, while we're working with all the utilities, cities, automakers, and various customers across the U.S. and the world. So the biggest news that happened for us here was we were actually acquired by Shell here in February of this year, which I think speaks a lot about the importance of electrification, the fact that, it is obviously, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And with something as large as Shell being a part of that, that makes a big difference. So with that said, so far in our 10-year history, what we have learned as the sort of source of these solutions is the most important thing we can do is we cannot look for a single solution that's going to fit and check all the boxes. Charging infrastructure for us, it goes beyond a shiny charging station. It's the hardware itself is one piece of it, but it's a question of understanding what each fleet customer needs and listening to their business case, listening to their situation, and being flexible enough to be able to help support that. What we stand by is that we believe in open standards. We do not believe in proprietary sort of solutions. And that opens up the doors to working with all the different hardware vendors and trying to figure out what that solution may be, whether it's light, medium, or heavy duty. That's the big difference, that you make sure that that customer is heard. And we do that obviously through the software and through the different services listed here. So the network software is what you're going to use to be able to operate and monitor that network of charging stations. It could be, in the 2s or 3s. It could be that you're actually looking at different depots in different locations. It's all under our Sky platform, which is sort of our baby. What's going to actually help in that TCO conversation that Trevor brought up is where does that smart charging optimization come into play? We need to understand where that power usage for the facility and to be able to manage the entire energy bill, which also includes the building and other pieces that come into it. And that's where we can rely on our relationship with the utilities. That's the other piece of it. We have to make sure that we bring in all the different players, including the utilities, because they have a huge role in this. What are those solutions? The digital mobility solutions, we're going beyond just using RFID cards. We're talking about using things such as plug and charge, where you're trying to create ease of charging, where you're just going to be plugging in, not have to swipe anything or use any app in order to start your charging services. So these are all things that are coming, and we have to be a part of that. And then obviously with our 100-year-old grid, we got to make sure that we are not creating, more of a load as opposed to trying to take the load that's there and maintain that reliability and continue the efficiency to keep that grid up and running. So With that said, we understand that there's lots of pieces to this, and so we're here as sort of the turnkey approach, and that's why we think that the do's and don'ts include all those different pieces. What sort of hardware is needed? Is it something such as what Desmond has to offer, given the situation? Is it something that's going to require a more robust situation or solution, I should say, because you're dealing with medium and heavy duty charging? So you're going to need, maybe 150 kilowatt up to 350 kilowatt charging. Being in a position to bring our folks on to help with the program management side of things, that's also another key. Obviously, if and when there is any engineering and commissioning needed, that's also a big part of it, and of course the software and mobile app. And then more importantly, once it's in the ground, how do we make sure that that's maintained and keeping your business going? And that's where the customer support and O&M comes into play. So all of that is something that we can discuss. So real quick, I'm sure a lot of you folks have already been given the discussion regarding what is the meaning behind, electrifying the fleet, but there's lots of pieces that are going to come to it. So one thing you're going to see is those fuel prices that will go up and down so much. Your electricity prices are much more better mandated and controlled. So there will not be that sort of huge fluctuations that you're going to see. So once the system is up and running and is running the smart sort of management and load management side of things, you will see that there will be savings within fuel costs. Initially, obviously, there's going to be a higher cost for the vehicle, but then you're going to see that the savings with the maintenance, that's going to have fewer parts in the vehicle, as well as the savings from the smart management side of things is all going to come together. In terms of the operations, we, again, using the digitalization that I mentioned with plug and charge and other sort of activities that are coming, it's going to make it even more efficient, which makes, from the operations perspective, a much better sort of system to be able to set up. Government policies. Right now, we are in a very interesting sort of scenario where there has to be some support coming from the various entities within the state governments and local governments that can help with those initial CapEx costs. Or, there's opportunities, for example, in Southern California where now they have a program where 5 years of no demand charges. So there are ways that we can benefit from the government policies in order to be able to get electrification into your market. Obviously, from the CO2 footprint reduction, if you're looking at how this affects all of the LCFS credits and what we're actually doing for the big picture, there's also a lot to be said there. And obviously, when it comes to the benefit that it comes from the image of that company that's going to be sort of involved in the electrification world as well, and being able to use these technologies for the better sort of corporate reputation. So just again, going through each of those pieces and what the sort of mentality is. This is the precursor to obviously everything going into the ground, and that's where is the engineering going to come into play to try to figure out what's the best solution for your specific business use case. What is involved with the installation with regards to making sure all the different charging hardware and the different sort of versions of different systems, level 2, level 3, is available. Once it's actually in the ground, to commission it to make sure that it's up and running properly and is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, and then obviously having the operations and maintenance side to help support once it's in the ground. Once you're up and running, obviously this is where the networking and the software piece comes into play, so you're able to actually have that remote monitoring to be able to get the real-time status of all the chargers and making sure that that system does not go down. Realizing that in the medium and heavy duty, we'll specifically, again, referencing what my colleagues here spoke about previously, that's business lost, and that's the worst thing that could happen in a situation. So that's where the monitoring will actually be able to come into play. And then, of course, being able to associate with any customizable pricing and or billing that's going to be coming with that depot, that location, to make sure that it's feasible to you as the fleet manager. And then advanced reporting, giving you that utilization data so you understand what your customers' needs are. And more importantly, you can use that information specific to doing route planning and all of the fleet management side of things that also needs to come into play. And then finally, with regards to what happens as a part of support is obviously from the training side, where we actually are able to support what happens in the usage of the software as well as the hardware itself, the station support, which you also mentioned, and then giving direct support to you, the business owners, as well as the drivers themselves, which may need 24/7 support. So that's all very important to make sure that that's discussed previously. So just two quick examples of situations where what I mentioned in the previous slides is actually being used in real life. So we actually are now working hand in hand with Volvo Trucks. You might have heard about our announcement at the ACT Expo. We are working with Volvo as we get, I believe it's up to 4 of their depots at this point, 4 of their different customers, where we're including 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers in order to be able to get their trucking facilities up and running for what we call opportunity charging for what will be essentially very big batteries in these trucks. 50 kilowatt DC fast chargers in order to be able to use overnight in order to make sure they're prepared for the next day. Level 2 stations for the vehicles that are actually the customer or the employees, I should say. And then, of course, the forklift chargers for the in-warehouse operations. And all of this is in conjunction with 15 other partners as we are integrating distributed energy resources and then figuring out where the load management smart charging is going to be beneficial for these customers. And that's in conjunction with our partnership with Burns and McDonnell. And the last example is a program that we've had on the light duty side now going on, I believe, 4 or 5 years with the LAPD, where the LAPD itself has made a commitment in order to be able to reduce their dependence on their internal combustion engine vehicles. We've been a big part of their sort of launch as it came about. They're now, I believe, even higher than these 100 BMW i3s that I have in here. I think they're getting pretty close to their 500, maybe they're at their 400 at this point. We have been able to use our open standards as expected. We are also providing their chargers at their other station locations outside of just their main station. So all of this is obviously because we realize that, like I said in the beginning, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when all of this has to become a reality. So step by step, we're working along with each of these customers, not just these 2, but many others, to make sure that we can listen to each of those cases and figure out what's the solution that's best beneficial for all. So thank you for your time. I hope that this was informative, and I look forward to questions not just from today, but hopefully beyond, and we can continue having this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to thank the panelists, Desmond, Trevor, and Ideen for their presentations today. We're going to use the next 10 minutes or so to answer some of the questions. And the first question is going to go for Desmond. Aaron Gallagher asked, is that 18 and 24 months for DCFC or level 2 charging?
Either, frankly. So the response we've got from both DGS and DCAS in New York City is it's taking them in California an average of 18 months to go through the entire process of planning, permitting, environmental impact studies, and then of course the construction, electrical work, and grid interconnections and all that sort of stuff. 18 months. Same thing in New York, only a little bit longer.
Okay, great. The next question is also for you, Desmond. Heather Miranda asked, what about ADA requirements? How does that happen? And also, how do people set rates for use?
So what's the second half of the question?
How do people set rates for use?
I see. Okay. I'll start with the second half of the question first. We are entirely agnostic as to the business model around the EV charging itself. So our customers make decisions about how or whether they charge. Usually what happens is when our customers come to us, if they already have a use case and they're already on a network, which, as is typical with most fleet operators, we just replicate that by installing the charger that they're already using and the network that they're already using onto our product. Our product isn't an EV charging product; it's an EV charging infrastructure product. So we're just enabling EV charging in the fastest and most scalable way and lowest total cost of ownership way. When we do have customers that want to do something like, for example, charge for charging or do access control but don't know how to, we take them through a little consultative sell, and then we make recommendations from any of the quality vendors that are out there. From a point of view of ADA, so the way we mount the chargers on the units, you do not actually have to get on the unit. You don't have to get under the solar array to do it. So what typically happens for ADA compliance is the units are deployed next to accessible parking spaces, and of course in those environments the accessible parking spaces already had the upgrades done, and then the users are able to use the charger but without parking on the product or under the solar panel. Just while I'm on that, I should say EV ARC products can charge up to 6 vehicles at the same time and reach as many as 10 parking spaces. So that's not just useful from an ADA compliance point of view, but it's also very good from a point of view of fleet or workplace charging, where you can plug in multiple vehicles and not have to have them all parking on the unit. They can just be parked close to it.
Awesome. Okay, Heather Miranda asked, this is for Trevor. Does EVMC work with DC chargers and keep the DC fast charge or fast fill energy flow?
Very good question. I should have mentioned it earlier, actually. So the EVMC is also an agnostic type of product, so it's agnostic to the charger selection. That said, we do like to, of course, make sure that we've tested compliance compatibility with our solution to the charger in question, right, or the charger that the end user would like to use. And so we'd like to do that. But yes, for DC charging can be supported. My suggestion for sure is, if there's an interest there, to just get in touch with us, and then we can talk about the specific charging scenario you're looking for, and just confirm that it's compatible and works with the charger that's in mind. As far as the DC fast fill, the same case, yes.
Cool. The next question is for you, Trevor, as well. Can the EVMC from cyber switching be placed outside and exposed to the elements?
Very, very good question. So if you go to our website, you see a real nice snapshot. Sorry, I should have put it into my presentation, but yes, absolutely. Typically what we do, the EVMC itself is, you can tell from the picture, the little white box, it's only about a foot by maybe 2 inches, and so it's relatively small. But typical installations, what we do is we end up putting it inside a weatherproof box for outside installations. It can be done inside or outside. For outside, we include it as part of the EVMC kit. We include a NEMA for our enclosure, which is weatherproof.
The last question. Okay, great. And then the last question is for Desmond. What is the cost of this product, and what is the M&O compared to installing own chargers?
So the standard EV ARC product sells for $60,000. So the two things that are very important to remember about that is the total cost of ownership. That includes all construction, installation, planning, everything, because there isn't any. We just drop the unit off at site, usually in the middle of the night. You shot the next day and you've got charging installed and ready to operate. And then the other thing to remember is you'll never get a utility bill. So depending on where you are in the country and how you use the product will offset between $40,000 and $80,000 worth of electricity in its lifetime. And so it'll pay for itself from a point of view of power, but usually the installations where we're deployed, the break-even ROI is day one, because the product, it's less expensive to install than it is to dig the trenches and go through the construction process. And then just one other thing to know, because the product is solar powered and has onboard storage, it is until the end of 2021 eligible for the federal investment tax credit, which is a 30% credit. This is not a deduction, this is a credit. So if you buy $1 million worth of our products, you'll get $300,000 back against your federal tax liability. And then it's also eligible for Rule 179 accelerated depreciation. So you'll get to depreciate 85% of the value of the product the first quarter you file taxes as well. The combination of those two things is worth about 50+% of the out of pocket. So a $60,000 unit for anyone who has a federal tax liability is really going to cost them about $30,000 out of pocket. And remember, it'll produce $40,000 to $80,000 worth of power, and you'll have zero costs where construction or anything else is concerned. If you're a government entity and you don't have a tax liability, you can't take advantage of the tax benefits, we have financing mechanisms which we can make available to you, which will reduce your costs through taking advantage of the tax benefits. And all of our products are available either for capital purchase or for lease, and we have a couple other financing mechanisms as well to make them very approachable.
Okay, great. It seems like we have no more questions. We are approaching the end of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar here. Again, I wanted to thank our panelists, Desmond, Trevor, and Ideen, for your presentations today. I also wanted to say, if we didn't provide an answer to your question, if you have any questions after this, please get in contact with any of the panelists through their contact information as you see on the screen, or you can contact me as well. Along with that, I also wanted to mention we'll be sending out a copy of this presentation later next week. The slides and the recording of this webinar will also be emailed to all of you. Finally, next month's webinar, Best Strategies for Planning, Procurement, and Staff Training, will feature fleet managers who will outline the process they followed for successful fleet electrification and highlight the importance of staff retraining. I wanted to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it as informative and insightful as I did, and I want to wish everybody a great rest of the day. Thank you again, Desmond, Trevor, and Ideen for your presentation today.